Good morning, everyone. I have a cracking, crunchy headache. I'm just waiting for the painkillers and every other medication I have to take in the morning to kick in. I haven't even bothered getting dressed after last night. So there you go. Right, housekeeping. I'll answer any questions or anything at the end. You know the conceit of the show by now. I'm just reacting to the news, mostly the headlines, quickly skim reading the articles without really knowing what the hell is going on with any of it. It's kind of a satire, I suppose, but it's just for people who, like me, can't stand the kind of chipper, cheery morning television news that's out there. So it's an opportunity to commiserate. What else? Housekeeping. October's is usually Schlocktoberfest for me, which means I churn out a bunch of stuff. I've got a bunch of cheap and cheerful, nasty and strange monsters up on drive-thru or on post-mort.com. So if you need something for your fifth ed adventure, you can trot on over there and grab those dirt cheap. I was going to have more out this month, but with the cat breaking his leg and now my mum's not very well, so I'm constantly having to go over the road to check in on her. It's been a bit of a disrupted month. So Schlocktoberfest, the stuff I've started, some of it I'm going to make more professional and get out there over the next month or two. What is going on? There we go. That's better. Now you can see the text. Every time I start a stream lately, something has changed, either on OBS or on YouTube or wherever else. This is me trying the new live stream control room, so we'll see how it goes. Hopefully you can all hear me. Looks like the sound is working. Right, shall we get on with the news? Is there anything else I've forgotten to mention? Podcasts will probably be coming soon, starting with inappropriate characters. I'm going to go back through our past show list, download them, convert them to MP3, get them out there. Might start something of my own. I don't know yet. Figure that out. And eventually I'll be doing a podcast with Rachel Haywire as well. So if you like sort of transhumanist, cyberpunky, alternative culture type stuff, and two outcasts commiserating about the state of the world, then that should be right up your alley. Right, what's in the news then, besides Brexit, which I'm going to leave to the end, though. Bojo wants an election, and wants it on the 12th of December. And to get that, under the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, he needs 2/3 of MPs, that's 434 MPs, to back it for it to pass. This seems unlikely, but it's possible that Corbyn and others don't quite appreciate how much they're not necessarily liked and might try to go ahead anyway. Bojo knows that Brexit is going to confuse matters, and he's hoping that his hard line will help the Conservatives romp home to a victory by making a single issue election, which is profoundly dangerous for the state of the country outside Brexit. The Brexit Party, if they ally with Boris, could mean that we end up with a rather hard right government, worse than it currently is. If they don't, then it might split the Conservative vote, but then Labour are still kind of going it alone, and none of the Remain parties particularly want to work together either, which is disappointing. So much for good of the country. The SNP and Lib Dems, who together I think could provide the government with enough backing to call an election, suggested that it be changed so that it occur on the 9th. This seems like a tiny, weeny little thing to worry about, but it knocks 3 days off, which means Bojo couldn't force through his agreement in the time remaining to him. So that's why that's a tactical move, but that's so far been rejected. He wants to have the vote, and then he'll consider alternative proposals from other parties, which could include a second referendum. I think he might be able to get it through Parliament if he said, okay, well, we're going to have this election, but then we're going to have a second referendum at the same time, or the day before, or whatever else. It's a very tight timetable for any of this. There's not really enough time to organise. Oh, the other thing about the timing is that if it's 3 days earlier, then students aren't all disrupted, basically. And the student vote tends to be more pro-European, more left-wing, more Labour, Lib Dem, minor parties, Greens, things like that. So if you disrupt the student vote, that favours the Tories. So yeah, it's kind of temporal gerrymandering, I suppose you could call it. That's one way to put it, anyway. I don't know, man. I don't think an election is going to sort out the issue, because it will become a single issue election around Brexit. And that's not going to fix the deadlock. We're likely to end up with roughly the same position that we're in at the moment, all things considered. And I don't think it's going to resolve it. And our electoral system is notoriously unrepresentative. It distorts votes massively. If you live in a safe seat, your vote doesn't matter. If you live in a swing seat, your vote matters, and they will expend all efforts to try to persuade you one way or the other. And it's not representative. It hasn't been for a long time. Most governments aren't representative. We've been in this weird state of needing coalition governments for some time now. I'm hoping that shows that it can work, and that will help move to proportional representation. If there's a silver lining, right, to all of this Brexit mess, it's that it has underlined every single fracture and shortcoming and problem in the UK's electoral system. So hopefully there'll be some appetite, some desire to change that moving forward. My beard's getting a bit long. Don't know whether to keep going or cut it off. Right. So, if you've been following the news, this one's gone international, but a whole lot of people were found dead in a refrigerated lorry trailer in Essex. A guy's been arrested. Maurice Robinson, 25, from Northern Ireland. And this kind of it shows the problems around human trafficking, and it's not just sex trafficking. It shows how international it is. It shows problems around the borders and so on, particularly the Northern Irish border. I think all of these are reasons why this story has really caught on, besides the sheer number of deaths. I'm not sure whether it's being charged with manslaughter or murder. Originally it was going to be murder. Oh, here we go. Hang on a second. Mr. Robinson is charged with 39 counts of manslaughter, conspiracy to traffic people, conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration, and money laundering. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. You know, a lot of the time truckers don't actually know what's going on necessarily, but if they're charging him with all that, they must be fairly certain he was involved. What's been shocking to me has been two things, really. Hypocrisy and a lack of hypocrisy, if you like. When this story broke, yeah, it was in all the papers and the websites and everything, and a lot of the comments on like Daily Mail articles and so on were horrendous, saying, oh, well, no, we should be able to do this to the rest of the immigrants, things like that. People trolling, not thinking, or just genuinely being horrendous. But at least they weren't being hypocritical. I mean, the Daily Mail is a horrendously anti-immigrant paper. It's always been a very right-wing tabloid. But then you got these other people saying, oh, how terrible, what a senseless waste of human life, who every other day of the week are massively anti-immigrant, anti-immigration. I don't know if you remember, but there was a whole bunch of Chinese cockle pickers some years back that drowned. They weren't properly supervised, they weren't properly trained, they weren't legal workers. And a lot of people tend to understand that. And look, after Brexit, there's going to be even more of a market for human trafficking and work gangs and all the rest of it, and it's going to be non-EU people. So this kind of situation is likely to get worse, not better. Let me just look up about those cockle pickers, because I want to get that right. Cockle pickers, Chinese, Morecambe Bay. There we go. Well, that was 2004. Doesn't time fly when you live in a disastrous hellscape? So that was 2004, February 5th. So would that have been either a year before or not much before the tsunami? 21 Chinese illegal immigrant labourers were drowned by an incoming tide after picking cockles off the Lancashire coast. And at that time of the year, the sea's going to be rough, it's going to be icy cold. Just not good for anyone, really. For me, it's a human tragedy. These are all people with lives, with rich inner landscapes and so on, and unfortunately this has just become yet another political football and has been dragged into the whirl of nonsense that a lot of people say about immigration and issues, and this kind of thing is likely to get worse before it gets better. Hi SVR, I will handle comments and questions later. Right, moving on. The weather's been pretty fucking terrible across Britain for a while now. It's been near constant rain. This morning we had our first proper frost, at least when I've been awake to see it. There's been problems with rail line flooding north-south in Wales, and rail services in South Yorkshire are now also being affected by heavy rain. So if you live up north or in Wales, make sure you check your travel updates and your weather issues. BBC Weather's pretty good for the UK, or the Met Office. Check your flood warnings and so on, and just consider what you're doing before you go anywhere, because things are likely to be disrupted, particularly in Wales and particularly around Yorkshire. So I thought, some people listen in the morning, might as well warn you, and this is likely to go on for a while, so just to make you aware. Online banks. There's problems with online banking and lots of crashes and lost data and all kinds of other problems. We've even got online-only banks popping up, which have no real way for you to interact with them on a personal basis, get hold of them and so on. And they do offer lots of preferential things because they don't have bricks and mortar. So they can save a lot of money and pass that on. But they're really not particularly safe. Some of the early ones that have a decent track record now are okay, but a lot of them, it is problematic. Even major banks are suffering more than 10 outages of their online banking services per month at this point. And with so much banking moving online, that leaves people without cash, without the ability to pay their bills, incurring penalty charges, all that kind of thing. So if you're financially not necessarily as secure, this kind of thing can be what tips you over the edge. I don't think people appreciate quite how fragile your funding can be if you're on benefits, or if you're unemployed, or single mother with a couple of kids, or whatever else. A day without access to your bank, and a lot of high street banks are closing, that can really have a knock-on effect on you. When you're counting pennies to feed yourself and your family from week to week, and suddenly you incur a £50 overdraft charge from your bank because you haven't been able to pay something in, right? It's obvious that there's a problem there. So MPs have strongly condemned the level of failure, saying it's unacceptable. The Treasury Committee has put out a report on it and suggested more urgency in tackling this and making sure it doesn't happen as often, and have also criticised the closing of bank branches and cash machines and so on. Though the banks are going to continue to close those because the high street is just disappearing. Locally, so in Andover, which is about 4 miles up the road, right? There's the Chantry Centre, which was a huge revamp when it went through. This was going to be the shopping centre for the town to try and compete with other nearby towns like Basingstoke and so on. It's essentially dead at this point. The centre in particular has a lot of empty stores and so on. Cafes and so on are much more on the actual high street than in the shopping centre. Local councils just bought it out. They're planning to do a big revamp of the whole thing, but I don't know that they know what they're doing, to be honest. They sold a bunch of the really nice sort of town buildings there to private enterprise, and they've fucked it all up. And now they're taking control of that. Yeah, shopping malls, that's the past now. We need to move on from that. I think for the high street to compete, it doesn't need shopping centres so much anymore. Rent needs to go down, rates need to go down, overheads need to go down, and the kind of businesses that you want are things like hairdressing and clothing, because at least for now you still need to try it on if you want a decent fit. Food, experiences, things that you have to do in person is the kind of thing that you need on the high street, and we need to create a capacity for people to innovate and try stuff out. But up until now, the response to more and more stores closing down has been to hike rents and so on, and that just speeds up the process. It's like nobody really knows what they're doing, and people in charge of governance, be it local, regional or national, are stuck in the past and just don't know how to deal with things. Maybe I should run for office. What do you reckon? I wouldn't get voted for. Too weird, too radical. Oi. Social media stuff. There's a couple of interesting stories about social media doing the rounds this morning. So, a while back, let me just get the dates so I got it right. Okay, so in 2017, a 14-year-old schoolgirl called Molly Russell killed herself. And after she died, her family went through her phone and her laptop and all the rest of it, right? And they found a lot of graphic posts that she'd made about suicide and self-harm on her Instagram account. Her family did the kind of media rounds. Her father spoke out, made a lot of headlines around the world. Instagram changed their policies and now remove a lot of what's termed harmful content. That's rather woolily defined. So her father, Ian Russell, has now gone to the US to meet other bereaved families of suicide and self-harm victims. And it's kind of interrogating Instagram and Facebook and others on what they're doing about this. Now, I have suicidal depression. I have self-harmed in the past. I haven't in quite some time now. Few years, anyway. There's an element of peer pressure and showing off. There are people that fake their self-harm and so on for attention. And I mean, we all know that social media is an attention economy. That's how it works. That's how it runs, right? But I am not sure that this approach is best, because often when you're posting on social media about these kind of things, what you're doing is a cry for help. So if we censor and ban these kind of groups, this kind of content, all you're doing is making it invisible and removing one of the ways in which people can ask for help. I think it would be better to monitor this kind of content, maybe, and then to intervene if necessary, or to alert local police or medical or whoever else that someone might be at risk. But cutting off this outlet, for all I have no time for the kind of fashionable cutters or whatever else, I don't think it's a good idea, because it is an outlet and a way to ask for help. This is kind of similar to my general free speech stance, really. It's better out than in. I'd rather know someone's a racist cunt and stop talking to them than have it all hidden away, or even not stop talking to them and try and persuade them otherwise. I'm just not sure this perfectly understandable instinct to censor and stop and prevent and silence is genuinely productive. But there you go. The vice of censorship never seems to slow. This story. It's another one that I'll just kind of throw up my hands a bit. A US Congresswoman called Katie Hill has been embroiled in a shitstorm over in the States for a few days now. It's just Democrat from California, and a whole bunch of rather personal photos and things were leaked, apparently by an ex-husband or something. That's what some people were saying on Twitter this morning, but I don't know how viable that is. But someone leaked a whole bunch of photos of her naked. She's bisexual. She's had three-way romances. She's gotten off with a few of her aides and so on. Aides with an E. And she was placed under investigation by the Ethics Committee. Now, there are some legitimate concerns here. foreign powers or whoever else could use this kind of material to blackmail her and influence her decisions and so on. But that doesn't seem to be where the main thrust of the public discussion is. People are just outraged for some reason that a woman was sleeping around and having fun and whatever else. And frankly, I don't see that it's anybody's business. Of the things that politicians do, if anything, I find their sexual shenanigans almost endearing because it shows a human side to them for the most part. And I don't think that's any of their business any more than my sex life is any of their business, right? So I resent their kind of snooping and trying to control my access to pornography and so on. But equally, I have no interest personally in getting in the way of their sex lives and so on. All I care about is how they operate as a politician. Now, while there are ethical concerns here, whoever leaked it doesn't seem to have done it for blackmail reasons or whatever, just out of spite and resentment, it would seem. But I just don't care. I don't care if Boris had an affair. I don't care if Trump's had an affair. I don't care if Katie Hill has had an affair or slept around or whatever else. None of my fucking business, has zero bearing on her as a politician. Cheating and so on, maybe, but you can tell a politician's lying because their lips are moving. So that's not anything new there, is it? But she stepped down. Now, you can't help but look at this and say, what if that was a Republican? Would this have happened? What would have been their response? Would they have toughed it out or would they have resigned? Because this isn't the old days anymore when a sexual impropriety, would completely doom you. I guess since Clinton, it hasn't really had that effect. In some countries, a politician having an affair boosts their popularity. Francois Mitterrand, I think, his popularity took a boost after it was revealed he was having an affair. But that's the French. What are you going to do, eh? I just don't see that's anyone's business. And what if it was a man, right? Plenty of male politicians have had affairs that have been publicised. Who cares? Who fucking cares? Oh, well, the other thing that's really annoying me is apparently she has an Iron Cross tattoo somewhere relatively intimate. And people are saying that this is a far-right symbol. It's not. In fact, the Wehrmacht, the regular German army, were quite anti-Nazi and refused to have swastikas on their equipment and uniforms and gear and tanks and whatever. It was only really the SS that did that. And the Iron Cross has a very long history of being its own separate symbol with meanings like loyalty and bravery and all of that sort of thing. Things you can appreciate regardless of side and regardless of culture. So to misrepresent that as some kind of Nazi symbol is just ludicrous. It's not. Biker gangs and so on have adopted it themselves, but again for those more positive reasons. And I very much doubt she's either a fascist or a biker. Moving on. More fires in California, apparently. Statewide emergency as wildfires whipped up by fierce winds continue to sweep through the area. That's Kincade. 180,000 people have been ordered to leave their homes, and roads around Santa Rosa were packed with cars as people tried to flee. I don't know if this is still regular fire season in the States, but it doesn't look like a lot of fun for anybody. So watch out for yourselves, guys. If you're in Cali, north of San Francisco, and there's another fire, the Tick fire, which is just north of Los Angeles. Well, that's going to help the smog, isn't it? But yeah, be careful out there. This is partly a problem we've made for ourselves by preventing so many wildfires, because it's part of nature. They're supposed to happen. We prevent them for ages and ages and ages, and then when they do touch off, it's a lot worse. And this is climate change at work. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that. Back to social media stories, and a positive one. Can you believe it? A positive story about social media. So, over in Taiwan, there is an app that they're using to try and pop people's bubbles that they've sorted themselves into and get them discussing and building a consensus, a public consensus on ideas and policies. I don't know if this works somewhere outside that kind of Chinese cultural paradigm. I don't know if that would work, but it's got to be worth a try, and it has been working quite well, so we're told. So this is in Taiwan, and it's an app. It's a process called V-Taiwan, with the V standing for virtual, right? So what it does is it crowdsources facts from people involved in an issue, brings them together, has them discuss and examine and cross-examine each other, gets out a rough consensus, and then organises meetings to discuss it. This is a fantastic way of both piercing those bubbles, bringing people together, forming a consensus, and creating a more almost Nordic style localized politics, but on a broader scale. And this seems like a really fantastic idea to me that I think more people should be looking to emulate and model. And it's quite tightly controlled. It's not a free for all. It's intended to stop people flaming each other and getting into yet another negative spiral. But it does also pop those bubbles, get people to discuss facts, and build this consensus around engaged people. And that's gotta be good, right? So I think we need to look into this more. They used it to resolve an issue around the Uber ride-sharing service in Taiwan. That really pissed off the traditional taxi industry, just as it has everywhere else. The US doesn't require the drivers to have a special professional license or the same type of insurance that regular taxis do, so they were undercutting by a huge amount, weren't paying the same taxes, weren't subject to the same kind of oversight, but the fares were cheaper and it was more convenient. So V-Taiwan got all these people together to debate it. It got everyone out of their echo chambers where they were only reinforcing their own attitudes, churned through everything, and just brought people together. So you can't argue with each other on there per se, but you can create posts to argue your viewpoint. So it's less action-reaction argument and more about building consensus. And that seems like a good model to follow. It hasn't really been used for anything super important yet, but it may be soon. But maybe that's a path forward. That's a way forward for social media to return to being more of a positive situation than it is currently. There you go. There's a thing about software scammers here. You know, when you get called up and, hello, this is Ranjit from Microsoft. It isn't Ranjit from Microsoft. Asking for access to your computer and your passwords and offering to do upgrades and stuff. Don't do it. A slightly older member of my family got scammed into doing that, and it was just an absolute nightmare to get their machine cleaned and sorted out, to get their money back in their bank account. I mean, basically, they had access to everything. So have a word with older people in your life and let them know. But I did talk about this a couple of weeks back, so I'm not going to do that again. Greta Thunberg, or how you pronounce it, has had a beetle named after her, which is nice. En Greta. What's the saying? If there's a god, he has an inordinate fondness for beetles. There are a lot of beetles in the world, so it wasn't that surprising that she get a beetle named after her. I'm still seeing an awful lot of climate change denial going around, and people still refusing to take it seriously and talking about how all these past disasters that people predicted never happened, like the ice age. Well, we should be going into an ice age. That we're not is a cause for concern, but the science that was around that wasn't particularly strong, and the media ran away with it, like they often do in science communication, unfortunately. And when people say, the world is going to end in 12 years, that's not actually what people like Greta or the science are saying. They're saying we've got that amount of time to make sufficient change to prevent some of these disastrous scenarios happening in the future. So there's a lot of misrepresentation, straw manning, fiddling around the edges, and so on. It's really hard to overstate how much of a big problem we have waiting, right? Panic is justifiable. It's hard to be hysterical enough about the climate disasters that we're staring down. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Read The Uninhabitable Earth and everything that it references if you never ever want to sleep again. The science is overwhelming. It's a huge consensus. We're seeing the effects in real time. I mean, what more do you want? We've even had like ExxonMobil scientists being interviewed by committees in the US now and basically admitting that they knew since the 70s that this was going to happen and covered it up and introduced doubt in a way not dissimilar to what happened with cigarettes. There you go. Sticking with environmentalism, it's a lighter story after the last one. A lot of animal tracking is done using mobile phone technology because it's cheap, it's available, it's easy to use. Russians tracking migrating eagles ran out of money because some of the eagles that they were tracking the migrations of flew over to Iran and Pakistan and incurred huge amounts of roaming data charges. So their attempts to track the migration of these eagles ended up bankrupting the environmental research that they were doing. So basically, it was sending data SMS messages while they were flying. But unfortunately, an eagle flew to Iran, where it created a huge backlog of messages. And the price per SMS in Kazakhstan, which is where it was at one point, is about 15 rubles. It's 18 pence or 30 cents. That's the normal cost. But SMSs from Iran cost 49 rubles. So about 3 times as much. So about $1. Yeah. So it's just funny. On the one hand, you've got easy access to this kind of technology for GPS and so on. On the other hand, data roaming. If you're still doubting climate change, there's a bunch of pictures released today of Iceland's glaciers, which have retreated by a total of about 750 square kilometers since the year 2000 and are losing about 40 square kilometers every year. I can't pronounce that, but Okjökull Glacier lost its glacier status. Glacier. I would say glacier in 2014, and they have like a meet every year to mourn the loss of that glacier. And these things are important because they're storing a lot of water and so on land, preventing flooding of our low-lying areas. And we like to settle on floodplains because they're fertile, and coastal areas because there's easy access to fish traditionally, which means human settlement is wildly vulnerable to environmental changes. Plus, we may well find that as the permafrost and so on melts, that ancient viruses and bacteria are released. So we could be facing a pandemic caused by global warming. And warming also allows tropical diseases to move north. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. And once you understand how it all interacts and the holistic effect of it all, like I said earlier, it's hard to panic enough. Knife crime. Violence in the UK is not actually that big. When they talk about massive percentage increases in knife crime and so on, numerically it's not that many. It's just that our crime rates are so low normally that it seems like a massive increase. And I quite resent the fact that Americans, who have a genuine massive problem with gun crime, are constantly pointing to deprived areas of London as some kind of excuse. Like, see, they don't have guns and they're still murdering each other. It's a lot harder to do a mass stabbing than a mass shooting, quite frankly. But people are kind of scrabbling around looking for ways to deal with it. We know how to deal with antisocial behaviour issues like this. You educate people, you spend money on social investment, you create more support, and so on. And this is what report after report after report shows. There's no way a Conservative government's going to get behind this. There's no way a Conservative government's going to say, well, okay, these violent kids, we should keep them in school. No, they're going to seek to punish them. And that's just the psychology of the right-wing position, even though scientifically we know that it doesn't particularly work. Rehabilitation works. Bringing people out, educating them, helping them find a place in the world is what works. Redemption is what works. Punishment isn't. There's always some recidivists, but overall, and yet our system of justice and our prison systems have, both in the UK and the US, all the Anglosphere countries, really, they've been sliding away from that idea of rehabilitation into revenge for some time. It's not a good look, and it's just creating more problems than it solves, quite honestly. Sticking with prisoners, the idea now is, this is another good idea, but I don't like the implementation. Long-term prisoners should be allowed to take student loans, apparently. Now, this kind of goes to what I said about rehabilitation, but this policy is unlikely to be instituted. A lot of prisoners do learn things, even if they don't necessarily get accredited while in prison, because there's not a lot else to do. And helping them get, college A levels, AS levels, or degrees, open university courses or whatever, it would be good. It would help them buy into society. But I'm not sure that racking up people who are probably already quite poor, already probably quite in debt, which is the reason why a lot of people turn to crime, I'm not sure that allowing them to take out £18,000, £20,000, whatever, of loans to learn something is really a good idea. I think it would help rehabilitate a lot of them, but saddling more people with educational debt, and I don't think so. I don't think that solves the problem. Coventry University, students are being moved out because there's a massive rat problem at one of their halls of residence. A bunch of them have been filmed because everyone's got their mobile cameras, of course, so it was basically undeniable. These big buildings, they've got a lot of ducts and things that rats can hide away in, so that's probably what's going on. And students aren't exactly the cleanest of people, so I imagine this sort of combination of things, plus the fact that the halls will be empty for large parts of the year, I think that's probably what's allowed the rat population to take off. But if you're a student in Coventry, good luck. Excuse me a second, I have to answer my phone. A problem for every games master has always been coming up with adventure ideas. For years now, Postmortem Studios has been helping out with the 100 Adventure Seeds line. These provide adventure ideas for all genres, and you can get them at RPG Now or Lulu.com. At the end of World War II, the Axis and the Allies went to war with A-bombs until nobody was left to fight. In this atomic wasteland, a new breed of rockabilly hero arises. From the gleaming domes of Science City Zero to the sleazy roller derbies of Vegas and the sky fortress of the Fourth Reich, there's a new world for the taking. 45 Psychobilly Retropocalypse, available at Lulu.com and RPG Now.
Aren't you a little tired of so-called horror media about shiny, sparkly, angsty, whiny monsters? I know I am, and that's why I created Actual Fucking Monsters, where you will play an actual fucking monster doing horrible and monstrous things and being tracked down and killed for it. Buy now at DriveThruRPG, post-mort.com or lulu.com.
Sorry about that. Like I said earlier, my mum's a bit ill, so I have to go over and help her in a sec. So, wrapping up things relatively quickly. More Brexit disaster planning. Operation Brock. God knows where they get the names for all these operations from. But it's the idea of turning the M20 into a lorry park, basically. They were so incompetent they couldn't even organise a traffic jam before. So, yeah, we'll see, I guess. Boris isn't going to get his 31st leave date at all. There's no way that's happening. So maybe this is all pointless, but just all this planning is shown time and time again to be utterly inadequate. Oh, how do I get out of this chicken shit country? Yeah, so there's going to be an extension. The EU's considering a 3-month extension, which would take us to the end of, January? Sorry, there's the phone again. I will be right back. A problem for every games master has always been coming up with adventure ideas. For years now, Postmortem Studios has been helping out with the 100 Adventure Seeds line. These provide adventure ideas for all genres, and you can get them at RPG Now or Lulu.com. At the end of World War II, the Axis and the Allies went to war with A-bombs until nobody was left to fight. In this atomic wasteland, a new breed of rockabilly hero arises. From the gleaming domes of Science City Zero to the sleazy roller derbies of Vegas and the sky fortress of the Fourth Reich, there's a new world for the taking. 45 Psychobilly Retropocalypse, available at Lulu.com and RPG Now.
Aren't you?
Right, sorry about all these interruptions. I won't have time to get to your comments and so on. A doctor's appointment, emergency appointment has opened up, so I have to run my mum off. Right, so I will see you later. Take care.